Let's go live to the Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukkar now. Let's talk about this housing issue first of all,
Hi, Laura.
Michael. Is it really amounting to a death tax? Would you go that far?
Well, there's a couple of big problems, Laura. I mean, we raised a whole lot of questions yesterday, and I think it seems quite clear now why those questions weren't answered and weren't outlined originally by the Labor Party, because this thing is falling apart at a rate of knots. Firstly, if you enter into one of these shared equity arrangements with the Commonwealth and get a CPI increase above 90,000 for an individual or 120,000 for a couple, they'll force the sale. If you inherit a property from your parents and you don't qualify, again, they will enforce a sale and take their cut. The Labor Party also has not made clear the billions of dollars that this would cost. They've deliberately only included the administration costs, some $329 million. But how many billions of dollars will taxpayers be on the hook for this? And finally, Laura, this is the sort of policy you have when you want to have a policy on housing, but you don't really want to do anything serious. If you look at the scheme that this is largely based off, the most successful of them being Keystart in WA, it's been running for 30 years. Over the last 5 years, it's done on average 300 of these a year. 300. People don't take these up for very good reasons, Laura, because they don't want Anthony Albanese at the kitchen table owning 40% of their home. There's absolutely no way Australians will take this up. And with all of these now details that we're finding out where the Commonwealth will force a sale in a range of circumstances, why on earth would anybody want to partner with the Commonwealth in those circumstances?
Well, it's not government money for a start. It's not Anthony Albanese's money. It's taxpayer funds. Wouldn't that be an investment if you could sort out these finer details?
Well, Laura, the Labor Party have not sorted out the finer details. And the reality is the Morrison government's got the Home Guarantee Scheme, which has already helped 60,000 people into a home with a deposit of as little as 5%, or for single parents, you can purchase a home with a deposit of 2%. We've expanded the scheme to 50,000 a year, some 5 times bigger than what Labor's proposing. And there's one big difference. You own 100% of the property under our program. Sure. We don't have a hand in your pocket trying to own it. There's a range of questions that haven't been answered, Laura. I mean, if there's a leaky roof and you've got to repair the roof, do you send an invoice to the Commonwealth for 40% of that repair, or do you wear the whole cost? And the Commonwealth only comes in at the end to take the cream off the top. What happens if you go into negative equity and you default? Does the Commonwealth come in and send in people to evict you? I mean, this has not been thought through, Laura.
Sure.
No one's going to take it up. It's not going to help many Australians because it is so flawed. And it's the sort of policy you have when you've ignored first home buyers for 3 years, as the Labor Party have, and on the eve of the election, they want to look like they're doing something.
Let me ask you about your scheme then. By the end of the year, with multiple rate rises, how many of those 60,000 people you've been able to help get into a home with just a 5% deposit will be under mortgage stress?
Well, Laura, there's very good news out of our program, and that is, firstly, there's been no defaults as yet. And
not yet, but we haven't seen a rate rise either.
Well, that's been probably a surprise to a lot of people, including a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise.
Why? The RBA said there would be no rises till 2024.
Well, there's been no defaults, Laura. That's, I think, very good news when you're talking about 60,000 people who we've assisted into a home, first home buyers, who are typically the most vulnerable cohort when you have any form of mortgage stress. Secondly, our scheme utilises finance from banks. The government's not providing finance. The banks are providing the finance. The banks are running the credit checks. And as a part of that, banks are required to ensure that when they're looking at your serviceability, they assume an interest rate 2.5% higher than what is the current prevailing rate. That's the APRA rules. And that's what happens when you think about the scheme and put a scheme in place that utilises those structures properly. The last thing you want is government coming in with the sort of elbow funny money. Our program utilises the ordinary bank processes for credit checks, which, as I said, assumes and requires banks to test serviceability 2.5% higher. And that's why I think we've got great faith.
Sure, but you're still giving a government guarantee. In some circumstances, do you admit that that government guarantee can give people a bit of a false feeling of security? Will any of these 60,000 people that have taken up your scheme be under mortgage stress by the end of the year?
Well, Laura, I can't answer that question. But
why not? This is your scheme.
Well, what I can say, because I don't have 60,000 individual circumstances in front of me. What I can tell you is...
Was that part of the modelling for this policy? I mean, you've expanded it. Obviously, it's a success. People are in their own homes, and that is great news.
It's a huge success. It is a huge success.
But you didn't model that.
And there's been no defaults. No, defaults are assumed under the scheme. There's no doubt about it. In fact,
how many?
Defaults are assumed. Well, over the forward estimates, I'd have to double check that, but it's a very small number. We're at zero. I mean, we are at zero right now, but the reality is we've got a very successful cohort. It'll be 50,000 a year. It's 60,000 at present, but it'll be 50,000 a year assisted. The big difference being you own the home. This is not a program that is new, Laura. It's been in place for 3 years. It's been a huge success. In fact, it's been lauded in many quarters because it has saved people years in time to save for a deposit. In fact, in some cases, it's saved people 6 or 7 years of saving to get into their first home. That's why it's been expanded. And the fact that it's been such a huge success to date is, well, one factor has been the use of banks for private bank finance, not the government providing finance, banks providing finance, banks undertaking credit assessments, banks putting in place all of those checks, and that's why the scheme has been so successful.
Okay, finally, before I let you go, in November of last year, the Prime Minister said interest rates would always be lower under a coalition government. Today, we might see a rate rise, and the Prime Minister says it's not about politics. Which is it?
Well, Laura, interest rates are at emergency record lows at 0.1%. I think most Australians were very conscious of the fact that rates were not going to stay at 0.1% forever. If you look historically, yes, interest rates have been lower under the coalition. There's no doubt about it. And one of the reasons is because Labor can never really constrain their spending. And that's why interest rates have historically been high. So that's just a fact. That's not an opinion. Rates have been higher under the modern Labor Party than they have under the Liberal Party or the coalition government. So, the fact that interest rates are at emergency lows, I think will not come to surprise too many people if and when there is a rate rise. And I think we've been talking about the fact that rates would normalise over the next period for a long time. I mean, this is not something that we've just been talking about in the last couple of weeks.
Michael Sukkar, great to have you back on the show. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Good on you.